Welcome, everybody. My name is Greg Oden. I'm the LMEA Division Chair for the Vocal Department. And so excited that you're here. Thank you for being here on a Saturday morning to enjoy this session with Dr. Trey Davis, who's the Associate Director of Choral Studies at Louisiana State University, and Dr. Rachel Harris, who is the Opera Director in Baton Rouge. And I will be monitoring the chat room. Please make sure that you ask questions, and please enjoy this session. Ladies and gentlemen, here we go.
Thank you, Greg, for that introduction, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I know you have a lot of other places that you could be, and so we are honored that you're here. Our plan is, for most of our session today, we're going to be sharing our screen with you because we have a Prezi that we would like to use. So I'm going to do that now, and hopefully while we share, you can still see our faces in the bottom corner of your screen, but you'll see this slide for the majority of what we're talking about today. I'm Trey Davis, joined by my great friend and colleague, Rachel Harris, and we are here to talk to you today about exploring unique collaboration, singing actors in the world of choral storytelling. Though they are often seen as disparate forms of vocal art, opera and choir share limitless, rewarding opportunities to forge new narratives through collaboration between director and conductor. Pastiche creations of choral theater are not simply a mish-mash of unrelated repertoire with superimposed staging elements. Rather, through thoughtful storyboarding, including the commissioning of new compositions, the whole of the resulting performance is indeed much greater than the sum of its separate parts. Artists, audiences, and communities alike are transformed in unexpected, profound ways as they engage with myriad thematic possibilities, including issues of social justice and cultural relevance in this unique concert-length format appropriate to all experience levels. This session will showcase notable examples of opera-choral fusion. I love saying that. I'm going to say it again. Opera-choral fusion. We'll detail the process of creating a pastiche production, and we'll highlight the careful fostering of safe space environments. Attendees will discover best practices to inform team teaching, theater pedagogy for novice and advanced singing actors. And if you're a choir teacher, your students are your singing actors, of course. And the addition of extra musical dimensions to a variety of performance mediums. Part of what we'll be talking about today is the fact that even if you are currently teaching online with your students, so much of the choral storytelling that we can do can be done via different virtual mediums as well. They will share our Prezi link to you in the chat box, so you're welcome to go and view the Prezi on your own as well. You can have all of this information at your disposal. If for some reason you lose the link, that's my email address. I'm easy to find. I'm very Googleable at LSU. We're happy to send you this Prezi as well. And I think now I'm going to turn it over to Rachel, and she's going to give just a little bit of context about our first video that we're going to show you today.
Good morning, everybody. I am so excited to be here. This first video is one of our first selections in our Pastiche program. It's called Will the Circle Be Unbroken? It falls under the category of what we'll be discussing as an introduction song, where the scene is set and the characters are introduced. This is our second piece in the program, and it portrays one of the main themes or questions in our story. Will we remain unbroken? You will also get a glimpse at one of the ways we used our venue. The performers were seated in the audience from the beginning of the concert, so the song starts from within the audience and expands into the circle encompassing the audience. You will also see Dr. Davis conducting a very smooth transition into our next Contra Dance and the continuation of the story.
And so this comes from a concert that LSU choirs did last fall 2019. I conducted, Rachel directed. It was one of, I think we would both say, one of our most rewarding projects we've ever worked on, period, in our careers. And so we're going to use this concert that we created as an example of maybe something that you could use to tell a story, to create your own pastiche with your students. One other thing before I push play. Because of the way the software works, I'm going to share the speakers on my laptop, and it's going to be going from my laptop into my microphone. So the audio quality isn't great, but again, if you want to watch this on your own, if you pull up this Prezi link on your web browser, you'll have the actual audio. So I thought I would talk a little bit about similarities between opera and choir. I think some of us that have been in operas or musical theater before, we realize that there are very many things that we have in common, but sometimes I think we make the mistake of thinking that these worlds are separate. I know at the university world, sometimes the choir and the opera world do not get along well. I'm really lucky where I work, we do get along well. But here are some ways that choir and opera are similar and offer rewarding opportunities for your students. Limitless opportunities, in fact, for vocal and physical communication and expression. Varied approaches to vocal tone and style. Interesting to think about that both in the opera world and the choir world. While there is built contra technique, there are also lots of different tone, timbre techniques to use. Also the idea that the best choirs we watch perform are the ones that are the most communicative facially, physically, just as an opera. They can comprise both emotional and narrative journeys. I think the best concerts, again, that we've been to in the choral world, take your audience on a journey, take them on a path towards maybe greater understanding or thinking about something in a different way, or inspire them more than just, here's a music that we're presenting to you. They inspire a collective contribution to a goal, project, or vision that is larger than any one performer, meaning that it's a team project, right? The best operatic productions are not simply about the star, but everybody involved in the process. Synergy, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Either grand or intimate in scope, or a combination of both. I love choral concerts that feature small ensembles and then, zoom out, so to speak, to the full choir as well. Opera can certainly do the same thing, chamber opera as well. They can either be from the Western canon, folk, vernacular genres, and or diverse cultures and traditions. I thought I would just pause to say, not every choir concert we do at LSU has bluegrass music and square dance or Contra Dance. But in this case, the story that we were telling, it really works perfectly to insert that along our narrative journey. Similarly, opera is not just classical music from the Western canon, but can be full of other genres as well. Can foster participation from a wide array of experience levels. We know that about choir, that we can have all sorts of different levels of experience and background, but opera too. Opera doesn't just have to be the most advanced singers. There's a place in opera for everybody. Programming can explore issues of social justice, current cultural trends, and meaningful topics for both the performers and audience. If you look at operas that have won the Pulitzer Prize in the last few years, they're all based on very relevant cultural trends. Our choral world is definitely moving in that direction as well. If you attended the NCCO conference at LSU, for example, a couple of years ago, and we hosted, the feature cornerstone work of that conference was considering Matthew Shepard, definitely a social justice piece, oratorio. And then thinking about, because of these topics that we choose very intentionally for our choir concerts and for operatic productions, how we transform both performers and the audience as they watch, this idea of catharsis. Benefit from both musical and stage direction, and perhaps choreography, stage combat, etc. That was actually a big light bulb moment for me last fall, this idea that in a choir concert, not only can we have beautiful classical Western music, but we can also have stage combat. We'll talk about that later. We can have choreography. All sorts of things are possible. Can feature the spoken word in isolation or combined with music in both choir and opera. May utilize an entire performance venue, including audience space, the house, you just saw that in the video, including non-traditional and unexpected spaces. So the takeaway is we are more alike than we are different, opera and choir. That offers us an opportunity to explore innovative choral storytelling through collaborations between the two worlds. Just a couple other things to think about in terms of this idea of how do we tell stories with our choir. Just because we are inserting these unusual extra musical elements doesn't mean that we can't also achieve all of our educational aims as well. For example, you can choose repertoire that tells your story while also meeting the national standards for music, right? You can also use cross-curricular ideas inserted into your storytelling. Broadening the educational experience, forming collaborative relationships. Rachel and I are a great example of broadening our students' perspectives just by watching us work together as colleagues and collaborators. This is a really small thing, but just giving my students at LSU the opportunity to work with a female director, I think that's really important, that diversity. Implications for virtual concerts. This idea that you can tell your stories via Zoom. Actually, Rachel just is wrapping up a production in New York of Carousel via Zoom and videography and all sorts of things that way. So that would be musical theater / opera example, but in the choral world as well, this idea of combining both pre-recorded music and live music and telling a story that way. Interesting dimensions to that. And then outreach and advocacy for audiences and within the choir itself. The reason I want to use outreach and advocacy as part of this slide is just to say that I think when we do our job the best, whenever we do our art the best, whenever we're the most creative and expressive, we advocate that choral music and opera music is valid and that it should last and it should continue and people should buy tickets to it and come to our concerts and our performances. And one way to do that is to make it engaging and to make it a through composed narrative, to tell a story, to tell a pastiche. Here are some examples, in fact, of pastiches. Is that the plural, pastiche? I believe so. In the professional world, these are all videos that you can find on YouTube. Again, I'll play a little bit of my laptop audio for you. Some different choirs that are being innovative in the way that they tell stories. You may know of Tenebrae English Choir. One of their most famous commissions was something called The Path of Miracles by Joby Talbot. What's really fascinating about this work is it tells the story of the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And so each of the movements talks about journeying to these churches. So in this brief video, you'll see this choir physically journeying as they sing the space in a cathedral, walking as they sing. It's a simple idea to process or to pilgrimage as a choir, but really effective and much different than just standing and statically singing. So I'm going to change my audio and then press play. I jokingly say whenever I was studying choral conducting in graduate school, I never thought that one day maybe I would walk down the middle of a cathedral moving my hands while walking. But I think our choral world is starting to move in that direction. I think standing in the same spot for an hour and a half may be changing a little bit the way that we think about that. Here's another example. Julia Wolfe actually won the Pulitzer Prize for this work called Anthracite Fields, an oratorio for choir. And this is just a brief example of the composer and some performers talking about how they put this production together. Again, a pastiche, this idea, maybe not a pastiche so much as just a narrative work for choir that involves movement and extra musical details like staging, lighting, all sorts of set displays. In fact, this venue actually was the venue discussed in the oratorio itself. I'll let them tell a little bit more about that.
There is something special about entering into a factory stage where a different kind of group activity happens. And suddenly we're an ensemble, they were an ensemble. It's a very interesting and beautiful dynamic and connection.
This piece in this space is extraordinary. You're in a space that was completely run by anthracite coal. It took that kind of power to make the steel of building, like things like the Brooklyn Bridge. Those things combined together in this cathedral to industry.
The question I have is, if you stand behind it, do you believe that you can get into that seat in one count?
Anthracite Fields by Julia Wolfe. I knew it was going to be a very beautiful ride, especially with all the movement involved and all the storytelling, because we are a choir that's so involved in communicating to our audience.
I love showing the end of that class, especially because it shows a conductor and a choreographer or director collaborating in the actual choir rehearsal room itself. And maybe not something that we see all the time in our world, but just really exciting to me to see that collaboration going on. Other things that I don't have a video for, but are easily Googleable on YouTube. You may have heard of Bernstein's Mass. There have been, especially because of the recent anniversary, there have been lots of productions of that with staging and all sorts of other elements, but a choral work, so choral narrative. This is interesting. Some view it as controversial, this idea of taking Handel's Messiah, which was not conceived to be staged because it was an oratorio, but has now been staged. One of the most famous is by Theater on der Wien. And they take a story and they put it on top of Messiah, which is, it's just fascinating to watch. The choir, a really, really good choir, memorizing the entire oratorio to stage this, all 2.5, 3 hours long. And now I'll turn it over to Rachel.
So I'm going to talk a little bit today on how to storyboard and what we did with our repertoire selection in this pastiche. What is a pastiche? It's an artistic work consisting of a medley of pieces taken from various sources. This is really an excellent way to take the materials your students are working on in their lessons and their choirs and turn them into storytelling. For example, the 24 Italian art songs. Most of our younger singers to our older singers are working on these art songs, and we can use these songs as your vocal score and create a story and script around it. So this pastiche program can be laid over any material, and you get to pull it all together on your own. For the set and for the production aspects of it, I highly recommend the black box philosophy, where your stage is a black box, where your performers dress in black, with just some accents as to what their character is wearing, accents with costumes, set pieces, props. It eliminates the stress of building a set. Or dealing with productions. And I get very excited about box kits. Box kits are 16 by 16 boxes or 36 by 16. They're either painted black, gray, wood, or any color, really. You can create them. Please think of box kits as Legos for stage directors. Out of these boxes, I can create a bed. I can create a bridge. I can create a fountain. I can create a car. So these, I highly recommend the use of box kits if you're doing a black box production. We definitely incorporated the black box style in the costumes that we used, but we were grateful for the opportunities provided in our amazing chapel venue. This was a really wonderful setting, which allowed us to really explore a lot of different aspects of the theater. We knew from the beginning that we wanted to include a variety of vocal musical styles with piano or bluegrass band accompaniment. We also wanted to include dance, which is, we chose Contra Dance. We chose Contra Dance because any amount of students that you have in your ensemble can be fit into a Contra Dance. Physical acting, stage combat, and the spoken word. And slam poetry is the poetry style that we wanted to go towards because it engages. This is what our 20 to 24-year-olds are really engaged with. And then you go into the brainstorming process. And let me tell you, this is the fun part. You bounce ideas off of each other. You let your imagination soar. I personally get very excited and passionate here. Everything comes out onto the table. Even far-fetched ideas is maybe aliens come down from the moon here. And so we really talk about anything that comes to mind and brainstorm and throw it on the table. And this is where I am truly grateful for my colleague, Trey, because he is a partner who leans in, who discusses, and then we whittle things down from there as to what we can really use. So we began with our foundation piece, the Come Away to the Skies, the High Lonesome Mass. We knew we wanted to build our story around the text of this work based on loneliness and isolation. We started by considering, in addition to the Mass, 15 to 18 songs, listening to them and taking note of what touched us, what images they invoked. Some songs fell easily into place. Other songs, I will tell you, there was a song we used called The Once and Future Carpenter, and I just love this song, and I was very taken by it. And so I wanted to include it. So the amazing aspects of a pastiche program is that you build your story around it and find a place in the drama that you can use it. So as we listened and discussed, we narrowed down our focus and came up with 11 pieces and a dramatic art outline. So you want to create an arc of the drama as a whole, a wide range that includes a wide range of movement, emotion, impact. You will have introductory songs. These are just an outline that we used, and it's a typical outline that you can create. You will have your introductory songs that set the scene. You meet the characters. We chose as our scene just a meeting place. And our first song was There's a Meeting Here Tonight. And then we went into the Circle Be Unbroken that you saw earlier in our session. And that displayed one of the themes of the drama. Will we remain unbroken, or will we remain as a circle? We then transitioned, as you saw, into the Contra Dance. So our height of our drama occurred quite quickly with this Contra Dance. We used the Lonesome Road Blues. It's the highest point in the drama, one of the highest points. It's high energy, joyful. And then within this piece, we began to build the tension through scenes with characters, inner scenes of characters. And that's where we used physical acting and actually incorporated a slap. So this leads us into our strike piece. And a strike piece is a striking sudden change of dramatic events. So we go from this joyful, joyful contra dance. We introduce other tensions in the scene, and we end with the slap, which strikes us suddenly and changes the course of the dramatic events. The drama is struck down from a high joyful energy to silent shock and awe. Then we transition back to resolution. And here are the just the outline that I created. You can create your own outline of how you transition back to a resolution. Lamentation, we used emotional contrast, struggle with the elements with O Sinnerman. Recovery with I am a maid of sorrow, and the once and future carpenter that I love so much. Healing with Come Away to the Skies. Forgiveness with Light of the Clear Blue Morning. And that's when we staged the characters coming back to the circle with acceptance, hugs, and tears. And then we went to our foundation piece. And that represented peace and acceptance and peace. And that is the Come Away to the Skies, High Notes and Mass. For our encore, we went back to Will the Circle Be Unbroken? Because we wanted to show the full circle, that in the end, despite what the drama took us through, we all remained as one in the end. So Trey and I discussed that we wanted to make this performance abstract versus concrete. We wanted to present the materials to the audience so that they decide how to interpret or feel or process the information. The only thing that we gave them in advance was that the program, we mentioned it in the program, that there were aspects of violence that were to occur. So now I want to set up the strike piece and show you how we moved into this strike piece. We used the Contra Dance as the background to show underlying tensions between the characters. In this piece, we showed acts of bullying, a fight between two brothers, and a young couple who were in an interracial relationship where the mother supports it and the father is against it. This scene shows the argument between the mother and the father, which leads to the actions of the strike. So this is our strike piece. So we realized that we wanted to use the spoken word, and we wanted to use the poetry slam style because it's very popular with the 20 to 24, with younger. It's just very popular, and it resonates with people today. So I reached out to my son. My son Benjamin has had an interest in slam poetry all throughout high school. And I asked him if he knew of any material written with the theme of loneliness and isolation. Very unexpectedly, he sent me one of his own poems that he had written a few years before in high school. The poem is called Hope is a Wound. And it portrays the struggle to remain hopeful among the many wounds and scars that we carry around with us and the many wounds and scars that we face in our lives. I don't have time to read the entire program for you, but I really wanted to give you a hint of what this looked like. So I'm going to read the first verse and the last verse, and I'm going to try my best to do it in a poetry slam style. So here we go. Hope is a Wound by Benjamin Orgel. Hope is a wound, the one that will never heal, that is always oozing ideals, that is always just this side of healing over, the one that burns forever, that is infected, that will fester and bleed. He then describes hope as a scar, hope as a bruise, hope as a bloody nose. And he ends up with the final verse of hope is a wound, the knife in your heart, the cut on your arteries, bleeding out, the sword in your gut, the razors in your hands, blood on your hands, the knife you put in someone else's heart. So as you can see, this text allowed us to explore many emotions and vulnerabilities that led to the deepening of the characters. Working with these students on these verses was some of the most profound parts of the show. It is very important to know when you work with very vulnerable material and when you work with exercises with physical stage combat, you need to start with trust exercises that bring everybody together. We spend a great deal of time in our rehearsals on trust exercises and talking, and it's very important that we will discuss this a little bit later, but it's very important that you create a very safe space for your students in order to really allow themselves to explore their feelings. So the venue was amazing. We used every aspect of the space. There was a front altar, from the front altar to the back pews, side to side. We performed in and around the audience. Not too much technology in this venue. The lights had about 6 settings that ranged from bright and joyful to dark. Our piece, Oh Sinnerman, was the darkest. We wanted to take out all of the light in the theater, listen to me. We wanted to take out all the light in the chapel, but we were not able to turn off one light, and it was the one that was shining on the cross, which ended up being very purposeful and beautiful, and so we kept it. We also used candlelight throughout the production, and the venue allowed us to enter from all different corners and all different parts of the room. From the back corners to the front corners and come down to the aisles. This required all of our performers to know exactly where they are moving from section to section. This is a whole other roadmap. For some performers, it meant that they had to exit a back door and walk around the chapel outside, and we had to have someone in there to let them in the door and make sure that they got to their next space. So there is, when you're using the entire venue, there's a whole outline to be created of where each person needs to go and be at the beginning of the next song. Possible production additions that you might want to look into, especially if you are doing pieces in other languages, are projections and supertitles. This is a whole nother discussion on their own, but please contact us if you're interested in incorporating that, and I'm happy to give you information and resources on that. So it was after that we spent weeks of rehearsing and working through the meaning of our drama that we ended up with the following thoughts, which was the main theme of our show. The main theme of our show became, our love for one another is not without strife. Strife can tear us apart, leaving scars, wounds, and feeling of loneliness and isolation. Despite our differences through these struggles, we can all gather in love to strive for understanding, to strive for peace. So that is how we came through our storyboard presentation. The next aspect is how we team taught our rehearsals. And again, please feel free to reach out if you have any further questions. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Before we go on, just as a brief further aside to my brilliant colleague, one of the things that I walked away from last fall that was just revelatory to me, this just brand new idea, this idea of a strike piece, and this idea that deliberately placing something at a strategic point in your performance and your narrative, the story that you're telling, to not only shock the audience, but to make them think in a different way, to inspire them to think. I think so oftentimes in the choral world, we program things that are beautiful, right? Things that we think will impress the audience. But I think part of what our mission should be as artists is to provoke at times. So things that are not deliberately beautiful. And in fact, the slam poetry was unsettling in a very deliberate way. I'll also say conducting in the dark as part of this production was one of the most fun things I've done. Never thought I would end up conducting in the dark, but the students loved it. For many of them, it was their favorite piece. So who knew? Team teaching. Moving on to this briefly, just a couple of things to think about. Some unique challenges if you are doing a production like this with choral singers. Something as simple as realizing some of these students had never been in a play before. Some of them had never been in any sort of dramatic requirement where they had to be a character or had to physically communicate something. Some of them were brand new to choir in general. So along those lines, just realizing as you plan your rehearsal process, building in time to really develop just basic skills like not turning your back to the audience when you're singing or speaking, like things that we take for granted as people that have done this for a while that were brand new to them. This idea of different ways to hold your body and stand as you sing. The idea of memorization for choir. Many of you, especially the middle school and the high school level, I know that you memorize everything. That's part of your rehearsal process from the beginning. We memorize a lot at the college level too, but it's not always our default. But for something like this, especially with intricate staging, choreography, combat, that had to be a very deliberate part of our process, is deciding what is memorized, what is not, when should it be memorized, and how, all of those things. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention about this process, working with choral singers and moving, I don't know the right term to use other than you have to allow time to go down into the valley and then come up the other side to climb the mountain. Meaning, no matter how well you rehearse something in your choir room, sitting and singing beautifully, once you add other elements on top of that with your stage direction and with the other elements of production, you do have to realize that the singing and the musical quality is going to take a dip naturally. It will for any level of choir, be it professional down to beginners, right? That's just part of the process. And so don't be shocked when that happens. Don't question what happened in my choir. They'll come back. It will come back to that high quality. But you do have to allow time in the process for them to integrate these new ideas and then come back and remember the things that you rehearsed previously. Rachel already mentioned this idea of how do you structure your program or your concert so that the story never stops? How do you integrate in your rehearsal process this idea of, no, just because you finished this piece, we're going on right on to the next thing. You really do have to build that in from the beginning of the teaching process. The idea of teaching your performers, don't telegraph to your audience that it's time to applaud. That's a subtle thing, but you can all work together as a team in your production to show, no, actually the story is continuing. And then I already mentioned this, but this idea of pedagogy for first-time singing actors. I use singing actor very deliberately because both are intertwined with the dash in between on purpose, meaning thriving equally well and expressively well, both singing and acting at the same time. One of the things with our poetry reading that we had to be very intentional about is giving Rachel enough time to coach them one-on-one so that they could be successful in and vulnerable in emoting that. I think I'm going to go to the next slide. These are the things that I just talked about. Oh, this is our program. I thought it would be interesting to show what did the audience see when they entered the space. So that's our poster. sort of a nod to the mountains, the bluegrass that we were going to sing. Then this is the repertoire. Notice the repertoire itself, this listing of pieces, does not give any indication that you're about to watch a story unfold, right? And we like that idea. We like the surprise aspect. We also like that it could be more than one story processed by the audience, right? It was abstract on purpose, meaning that people could have experienced our story in different ways, depending on who they were. And you can see a big mixture of genre here. You can see that we culminated in a major work at the end, multi-movement math with bluegrass elements. And then, as Rachel said before, we were very intentional about warning our audience in advance, creating a safe space for them that they were going to witness. They were both going to witness violence in the performance, and that they were going to be exposed to texts that talk about violence. And if you're creating a safe space for people, you need to give them the option to leave the room if that's coming, or to do what they need to do to feel safe in that environment. I think people always appreciate being warned in advance because they can be triggering for a variety of reasons. So making that very obvious in the program ahead of time. Which brings us to safe spaces. Rachel, do you want to sort of introduce this idea of what safe space is?
This is the first time that I worked in a safe space environment, and it was very profound for me. Up until working with Dr. Davis, I thought that I was really rocking it with the respect and generosity that I gave my students. But this takes it further, and it was amazing for all-inclusive language. So everyone in the room feels included and everyone in the room feels addressed. And so I needed to totally vamp my communication skills to lend to this. For instance, in the choreography, we have lots of movement from men and from ladies. And I needed to go through and filter out all men and all ladies, and I choreographed this piece as left partner and right partner. So that includes everyone. I got everyone in a circle because I knew they would all stand with their friends, and I just went 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, that you're partners. And everybody was happy. And it created this diverse dance. I will tell you, I got down to the last 2 partners, and they were guys, and I said, 1, 2, your partners. And their initial reaction was to be taken aback. And then they looked at each other. And then here was the cool part. They turned back to me and said, we're cool with that. And so this really created a fantastic environment in order for our students to really feel included from all walks of life. I'm going to let Trey discuss this more in depthly.
Sure. So there are many universities and organizations that have training along these lines. One of the ones that I have attended is at LSU, and I'm really proud to have attended it. It's very, very well done. They have an amazing website, and the link is included there. Talking about LGBTQ plus diversity and inclusion, but this idea of creating a safe space for your students and for the audience, that transcends just the LGBTQ plus community. It's for all of us, right? One of the most basic things, hopefully, that you've encountered, but if not, I will tell you for the first time right now, this idea of not assuming anyone's gender, right? Something as basic as not making those assumptions, not misgendering people, and just really, for the most part, taking gender out of the equation. Most of the time, we don't need it as much as we think we do, especially in the performing arts, telling the story that we're telling. As Rachel was describing, we really didn't need to think male, female. We just needed to think 1 and 2 for our partners. And that simplified things and made it much easier in a lot of ways. The other thing about not just this type of safe space training, but just creating a fluid, safe environment that allows people to be vulnerable and successful in a rehearsal and performance process, this idea of adaptability and flexibility. This idea, if you come in with an elaborate staging and idea and it's just not going to work, given the time constraints or given the students in the room, being open to changing that on the fly and open to really gearing all of this to making your students successful. At the end of the day, as educators, of course, no matter what story we're trying to tell, really our goal is teaching our students and making them successful in what they're performing and expressing. I think for time, I'm going to go on to our next slide, which is just to conclude and say, here is our contact information. And if this idea of telling a story via your choral concert is intriguing to you and you want to try to do this with whatever level choir you have, we would love to collaborate with you, or even just be a sounding board, answer questions that you may have. I do firmly believe that in any level of choir can create a story, a narrative thread, even if it's just three songs, 2 songs. There are all sorts of possibilities for your own programs. And we
do have one question,
okay. Sure.
Trey, and it is from Retta, and it's, can I purchase the poem, and what was his last name?
His last name is Orgel, O-R-G-E-L. Please contact me, and I will try and work out an arrangement for you. And I am definitely happy to work that out for you and put you in touch with him. He will be thrilled that you are interested in purchasing the poem.
We were told that there's a delay, so I'm going to say again, if you have questions, go ahead and type it in the chat box, and Rachel and I will give it a moment for you to be able to type something if you need to. I'm really glad I'm reading through some of your comments while we were speaking. It looks like the idea of bullying and anti-bullying really resonated with a lot of you. So I'm happy to read that that was meaningful.
Well, I believe we've exceeded our time, and
okay.
we appreciate so much your giving us this wonderful in-service, and thank you so much for your time and your expertise. Of course, anyone, if you would like to contact them, their contact information is in the Prezi, and it's also online at lmeamusic.org. Thank you so much for attending this session, and we all give our applause to these wonderful presenters.
Thank you so much. I so enjoyed talking with you today. Thank you.
It was our pleasure.
Yes.
Y'all have a great rest of your day. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks.